Thank you, Jan. Yes, so I'm Philip Engström from the Swedish Natural Forensic Center, which is part of the Swedish police. I'd like to start with getting to know the audience a bit. So, just by show of hands, how many have tried virtual reality at all? It's a good number. How many have been involved with some sort of development within the VR community? Quite a few as well. It's good to see. Uh, Outline of the presentation. So some bits and pieces about the Natural Forensic Center, what's it all about and what we try to accomplish there. Then something about visualization, mainly for crime visualization purposes, so in crime scenes. More specific about crime scenes. And then I'll dive into some of the projects that I've been involved with recently. So the Natural Forensic Center, we're our headquarters in Linköping, where I work. I've been there for about four years now. We also have locations in Stockholm, Gothenburg, and here in Malmö. And recently now, last year and this year, we're acquiring some more labs, so it's 8 more sites. Basically all sites except for Linköping is more like what you would think forensic lab work, like fingerprints, looking for different traces. When it's development work or like visualization stuff that I'm talking about, then it's Linköping where we have all our business. Oh yeah, and this is our building, so you recognize it. Don't blow it up. More specifically, I work at the Information Technology Department, where we have different groups with different specialities. Forensic image analysis, sensor technology, computer forensics, mobile and electronics, question documentation, and the part with what I'm talking about now is mostly within the sensor technology and the forensic image analysis group. So now to visualization. So you can visualize things in many ways, of course, as you all know. You can use a pen and paper, that's one way. You can make fancy graphs, you can produce movies, and depending on the way of doing your visualization, you might be better or worse at actually giving the correct interpretation in your audience. So this here is a 2D image of a 3D object, of course. How many have seen this object before? A couple of you. So this is very interesting when it comes to forensics or crime work. If you see an image of something and then you automatically build up with your imagination, you create this 3D representation. So without seeing this in reality, you can still figure out how it's constructed and well, figure out the 3D shape, even that it's just in 2D. And that is of course very useful. The problem is that it can be deceiving as well. Let's see if you'll get this. So, how many were surprised? A few. So Shugihara, he makes all these very nice models with deceive you. And in most cases, it's just fun to watch and fun to be amazed. But if you're on trial and somebody says that he's perfectly sure that he saw you from this angle and they have the evidence is some sort of 2D image, then maybe you don't feel quite as good about about it. So this is sort of the main motivation behind why we're trying to use 3D more. That's it. So when it comes to crime scenes, we try to. So the police work is always trying to figure out what actually happened, try to tell a story, try to figure out who's to blame, and eventually to make sense of all this in the courtroom. And the Natural Forensics Center's role in all this is usually to tell, to be sort of an independent expert organization on what a certain piece of evidence is actually worth. We have this image showing this car going by, because we know the frame rate, we have these references, we can tell that the car was driving in this speed with this probability. So we always deal with trying to make clear what's facts and what's just something that you can guess. And so when you try to figure out what happened in a certain crime scene, you might have videos, you might have images, audio recordings, witness statements, which are of course very much more useful early on. They usually say like if you have a witness statement that's more than a day, then it's more useless because everything, well, you start to make up your own reality after that. And of course a whole bunch of traces like fingerprints or blood or glass or whatever. So now I'm going to show something about Drottninggatan. So most of you are probably aware of that there were a terrorist attack in Stockholm in 2017, and became one of the this case became very important for us at my team there, since we were working on various ways of documenting crime scenes in 3D. It hadn't really been used in court before that, and during this process, the court wanted to have some sort of reconstruction on how the truck drove down the street. And they were actually thinking about like using a film crew and a real truck and driving it for real, and it's really hard to keep the exact correct speed and exact correct position all along the street. So along the way they sort of gathered that this would be more or less impossible to reconstruct perfectly. But then we came into the loop and said that we could do this in 3D instead and do a 3D reconstruction. So what we did was that we laser scanned the street. We used a terrestrial laser scanner and did about 120 laser scans along Drottninggatan. Put all this together into one enormous point cloud. And then we also laser scanned the truck and put that in the model. And thanks to the criminal the documentation of the actual crime scene, because we laser scanned this 1.5 months after the actual event. So then from the images and the traces we were able to reposition the truck and also to calculate which speed it had during different parts of the journey down the street. Let's see. Yep. Actually, the first guys to ask for the reconstruction was the persecutor. So they wanted to have this sort of reconstruction in order to put everything together. I mean, they had like maps, and they had different sort of placeholders for which event happened when, but it was very hard to grasp the overall event. Like some people were more involved in this one small part of like one part of the street where some people had been hit, other people were involved in another part, and it was hard to understand what had happened the entire event. And so when we I can just watch it to the finish. So when we did this reconstruction, in the beginning we were sort of a bit worried that some people from within the process would object to the evidence or think that it was too strong or something like that. But as it turned out, no one had any objections at all from either side. Actually, all involved thought it was a really good help to better understand what had actually taken place. And also we got feedback from the victims that they thought it was really good for them to better understand what they had actually seen. As I talked about before with the witness statements and what happens in your mind, a lot of people had started creating much worse scenarios and than it actually were. So that sort of helped them as well. This is another case we worked on after that with a double murder in Mantorp. It's very rough scene where two elderly people were murdered. In this case, we didn't really understand why we were asked to model it because they had perfect images of the scene and everything was, well, it was much clearer in the photographs what had happened than in our model and in the work we did. So we were a bit confused to why we were asked to do it. And then afterward it turned out they wanted to have this material in order to better be able to show it in court without having to close the doors and not letting anybody in because it was so gruesome images. So by having it less dramatic images, they were able to have the court process much more efficient. So that was a complete new thing for us, that you could use this visualization technique in order to make the material more available. And that's sort of what we're working with all the time. So now I'm going to switch a bit to the VR projects. So one of the first one we did was one virtual witness walkthrough, and that project that was funded by Visual Sweden. And it was the police and the Linköping University and a local company in Norrköping that do with 360 streaming. So the idea there was to be able to have a witness reconstruction with the witness walking a crime scene without actually being on the crime scene. So you would have a live 360 video being sent from the crime scene and the witness being safe in the police house or somewhere like that. Yeah, so you grasp the concept. Let's see. So what we did, I'm just trying to figure out. Yeah, so on the receiver end we had the HTC Vive. And on the transmitter side we had we tried first with this quite low end 360 camera, and then sent it over 4G. We also tried a very high end 360 camera. And what we found was that we sort of got the same experience with this really cheap one as with the expensive one. because what would happen would like if I'm walking here and I'm trying to describe, well, I found an object there, and then in order to more specifically point out something, then I need higher resolution than this, but I also need higher resolution than these really high-end systems as well. So it's a better idea to have like an extra camera that you add on and point out the details. So that was sort of what we found. And I'm not sure if I put, no, I didn't put that. Yeah, well, these are the main results from that project. And we had that system sort of live and working, and we sort of said goodbye to voices, and that we're gonna try out this in real cases for a year and see what happens. Then I met with voices 1 year later, and we still hadn't tried it because we didn't have time. So it still sits there. And at the same time, voices had gone around and made this a real product instead. So I saw on the news that they had put it on this self-driving lorry. That when they had this world first lorry that drove in Jönköping, in order to be, be able to have it automatically drive on the streets, they needed some sort of remote control, and they used the results from the project and continued working. So sometimes it goes faster in the small companies. This I just have one image from. So PolCon is the police training program for police in active duty. They need to train twice a year, 3 days each, in conflict handling. Nowadays they're not using VR in any way, but we have a ongoing project to start using this de-escalator product, which is a virtual virtual reality software designed to put you in stressful situations, but in virtual reality. The idea being that you could get a really realistic feeling on how it actually feels when somebody starts screaming at you or throwing things at you. And I mean, yeah. They're not doing that in this product, but it's quite new. They have just started doing a few like scenarios for very specific tasks. From what I have tried myself, I mean it feels sort of like a game, and it looks like a game, but the main difference is that they sort of always tailor it so you have your inputs are very realistic to what you're usually dealing with. So if you're like in the police training, the police main weapon is talking. So there the input output will be talking to the computer, and they managed to get it in a quite realistic way, so it actually feels like you're talking, and it feels, you get the feeling that the person is responding to what you're saying. And as long as you have that element there, you sort of forget that it looks like a game. So, so that's quite powerful. As soon as you get some very clear objective, your mind seems to forget about these small details. But this is something that we're just starting out with, and we're right now I'm involved with the specifications for this, for the prototype, and hopefully we'll have some sort of result early next year. I can, and also this is when it's a training, it's the training of one person at a time, and you're using like a normal HTC Vive. Then we have this other project, the Shot Pros. It's a Horizon 2020 project with 13 partners, one of them being Relion, which are developing this system. So you have head-mounted displays and backpacks, and you're able to train. Well, in this part it's 4, but I think you can go up like to 16 persons in the same virtual environment. And the idea of this is, of course, to be able to more efficiently train dangerous situations. Not sure if I think they also have this sort of feedbacks that you might get shot and you actually feel a shock from it. That's quite intense. And that's also another thing. If you're in training and it's no risk of getting really hurt, you will behave differently. But if you're actually at risk and it's actually gonna hurt if you're doing it wrong, the training becomes better. It's also interesting to be able to train without geographical boundaries. So you could set up one team in Linköping, one team in New York, and they can train in the same facility. That sort